Good evening, everyone. All right, we'll try that again. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. That's way better. Want to welcome you tonight. We have an exciting presentation on 10 steps for preventing Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. And as many of you, a reason why you're here is to hear Dr. Wes Youngberg. Just in case you don't know what he does and where he's been, he is one of the founding members of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. He has a lifestyle medicine clinic in Southern California with a focus on diabetes and cognitive decline. And as many of you have been coming to the Diabetes Undone, he's one of the keynote speakers in that program. And so I don't want to take much of his time, so I'm going to have an opening prayer and give him the mic, and you will be blessed. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I want to say thank you for today, and I thank you for this opportunity we have to come and to learn more about you and to how our bodies work and how we can take care of them. And with some of these plaguing diseases that we have and things that have for a long time, they said there was no hope. Lord, we're going to hear tonight that there is some hope. And I ask that you give us attentive minds and that you would bless Dr. Wes Youngberg, that he would have clarity of mind and speech. We ask and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. It's all yours.
Pastor talked about the importance of hope. Really, that's why I do what I do. In fact, I'll mention a little bit later that I wrote a book called Memory Makeover, How to Prevent Alzheimer's and Reverse Cognitive Decline, and hence our talk tonight. I got interested in this topic first because of my specialty in helping people reverse diabetes and prevent diabetes and reverse insulin resistance. And it was in 2014, I'm reading this study. It's actually a review paper done by Dr. Del Bredesen, published in an Alzheimer's journal, talking about reversing cognitive decline in 10 patients who had either mild cognitive impairment, and there's nothing mild about mild cognitive impairment. That's just what it's called. It's actually the third phase of cognitive decline. So it's really not mild. It's really more of an advanced state where it's now become more obvious that there's a problem. So if I'm talking too loud, let me know here. I'm just talking my normal voice here. So the key here is that as I was writing, I wrote that book because I saw so many people struggling. And this article by Dr. Del Bredesen talked about how about all 10 of these individuals, patients of his, had reversed their condition, mild cognitive impairment or early Alzheimer's disease. They'd reversed it in a period of a year, year and a half, sometimes 2 years. And so I was very intrigued by this, in part because I spent 14 years of my professional career as a medical missionary on the island of Guam. When I was asked to go there, I go like, where's Guam? Like, I didn't even know where it was, but it's out there in the mid-Pacific. And in fact, it's so far west that it's in the Far East. And I'm serious, because it's so far west that it's actually north of Australia and south of Japan, if you look at the Pacific Ocean. And while there was a condition that was unique to Guam called Littico-Bodig. It was a neurologic condition that combined all the harmful effects of 3 neurologic conditions: Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and ALS. Really bad news. But as a lifestyle medicine specialist, I had spent the majority of my 14 years on Guam addressing the more common chronic diseases: heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, hypertension, etc., cancer risk. And so I devoted my whole 14 years to dealing with that, and not once did somebody come to my clinic to address the issue of Littico-Bodig or even Alzheimer's disease for that matter. So I really didn't have much to say about dealing with Alzheimer's. I knew that many of the lifestyle medicine principles carry over into many other categories. Okay, but it wasn't until 2014 when I read that study that I became really excited and passionate about helping people with Alzheimer's or with any of the lesser stages of cognitive decline, which we'll go over tonight, and we'll expand on it tomorrow afternoon as we address what really caught my interest is when Dr. Dale Bredesen, a neurologist of 40 years, who is a really expert, amazing neurologist, he said, the most common cause of Alzheimer's disease is insulin resistance. And that really opened up my eyes because I was an expert at reversing insulin resistance. And all of a sudden, without realizing it, I'd just become an expert at dealing with Alzheimer's. Because I hadn't known that connection until then, until 2014. And it was after that I spent time studying and under Dr. Dale Bredesen, attending his workshops and his programs. And now we are very good friends. He refers many of his friends to me because he doesn't practice anymore. He just runs a comprehensive international program. And I'm working with many of his colleagues in helping people reverse cognitive decline, but also prevent it from happening. What about those of us who have a family history of dementia? And I will not ask for you to raise your hand, but I'm one of those people. My grandfather died with Alzheimer's. My uncle has Alzheimer's right now. I know I'm at risk. Hopefully, maybe tomorrow afternoon, I'll tell you some stories about myself, right? I think one of the best ways to allow my patients to feel comfortable around me is when I tell them about what I'm doing. And when I tell them about the things I've learned about myself and the challenges that I've had and how I've dealt with them, all of a sudden now we're working on this together. It's not the doctor helping the patient, but hey, we're all doing this together. I'm on the full program. Everything you're going to learn tonight and tomorrow, I'm seeking to implement myself. I'm not perfect. I'm not 100% every time, but when I make a mistake, I get up and I try again, right? So because it's all about being willing to do what you got to do, even if you made a mistake. And we are human, so we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make bad choices. I'm going to tell you about some of the bad choices I've made when it comes to diet or exercise that have driven me, kind of controlled my behavior to the point where I made really bad decisions. And so we'll be sharing all that with you. So let's jump right into this. I want to start our presentation by looking at, actually telling you about this YouTube video that was posted in 2014. And to the right there, you see Dr. Ronald Peterson, who is the director of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at your very own Mayo Clinic. And he's been the director for many, many years, and he's still the director. And he's meeting in 2011 with Glenn Campbell, country music fame, Rhinestone Cowboy. And you can watch the video yourself. Just go to YouTube and type in Glenn Campbell, Mayo Clinic, Alzheimer's, and you'll see this very video. Glenn's wife, Erica, is filming this with her cell phone, and where Dr. Peterson is explaining to Glenn and to his wife, Erica, that he has Alzheimer's disease. And Glenn, it's just nicest guy, right? He's just kind of like, well, I've been having a little bit of problem with that. You could tell that his communication isn't all there. But it's amazing. It's an amazing story. There's an amazing documentary that Dr. Peterson at Mayo Clinic did with Glenn Campbell and his wife Erica. Also, I think it was 2014 when they did that documentary. You can watch that as well. So what was really interesting about this video on YouTube is that here Dr. Peterson is showing Glenn and Glenn's wife Erica the MRI scan, and he's pointing with his pen to the hippocampi. This little like bean-shaped part of the brain, and it's really interesting. If you've ever seen a bean that's half white and half brown or black, right? So that's what it reminded me on. And it's the calypso bean. It's also the bean that's known as the orca bean, because that's what orcas look like, or the yin and yang bean. It really looks more like a yin and yang symbol. And what you're looking at there is the very tip of his pen is pointing to the bottom side of that brightly whited out area, which represents the entire area of that section of the brain. And there's one hippocampi in each hemisphere of the brain. It's pointing to the area. The bright whited out area is the loss of hippocampal index neurons. This is really, really critical to understand, because in that little area of the brain, it's like the file cabinet where the librarian keeps all the index cards for every book and everything that has been categorized in the entire library. Without those index cards, you cannot find any book in that library. And so when there's atrophy, when there's damage, when there's loss of these neurons to the hippocampi, I want you to really understand what the hippocampi are, because we're going to be talking a lot about that throughout this weekend. It's the area of the brain, that little section, again, where that pen is pointing, the gray area just to the right of the pinpoint of the pen is the darker gray area is the part of the hippocampi that has remaining, still active hippocampal index neurons. So basically just over half of all those index cards in Glenn Campbell's library indexing system are gone. They've been burned up in a fire. They're just gone. Which means that every single memory that was otherwise connected through those index cards, through those index neurons, is unreachable. The memories are still there. This is important to understand. The memories are still there, but you can't access them because you no longer have the link. It's like, have you ever gone to a large, maybe 100-page PDF article on your computer, and then you can go click to the upper right of the PDF article and you can search for different words, and then you can find what you're looking for? Well, what if that search function was eliminated? Now it's going to take you forever to find things, and most people would give up. They would never find it. Now, what's really interesting is that we have the chance to actually renew some of these index cards. And we're going to be getting into that in quite a bit of detail. And so as Dr. Peterson from the Mayo Clinic is pointing out, Glenn, this MRI clearly shows that the memory challenges you've been having and the cognitive issues that you've been having are clearly related to Alzheimer's disease. Now, I was going to comment on something, but it's going to come up in a little bit. So this is really critical. And as we begin this weekend series, I want you to understand that there's two basic principles that if you only understand these principles, you're going to get it. You're going to start making some good decisions. And it comes from what I call the two greatest laws of health and disease. Tomorrow morning, during our divine service here at the church, I'm going to be actually giving the sermon talking about the two greatest laws of health from a partly spiritual perspective, but also primarily for one of the key aspects of the 10 steps to reverse cognitive decline or prevent Alzheimer's. So, and I'm going to be, it's going to be a divine service. It's going to be like just a regular denominational church service. There's going to be some singing. And you know what? We Americans have kind of lost the art of singing. A lot of people they're not comfortable singing. So, and not unlike, of course, people in Europe that go to a soccer game, they're singing up a storm, right? That voice. So they're excited, they're passionate about singing. And you know what's cool? What's really amazing about singing? When you sing or when you hum, when you raise your voice and express yourself through song, it actually helps grow new hippocampal index neurons. I'm not making that up. I could show you the research. In fact, there's studies demonstrated. In fact, you can even look this up on AI. I looked it up yesterday on AI. That musicians, people who spend time developing their voice and developing the singing skill, have larger active areas in their hippocampal regions of the brain. And that is everything, because the larger it is as we go in time, the more resilient it is, okay? And the more we have to protect, but the more we can prevent getting to the point where now we can't connect ourselves to those memories. I've had a patient now for 15 years who first came to see me 15 years ago because she said, you know, I had a really interesting experience with my family recently. And at the time it was kind of funny, but as I contemplated on it, it actually caused me to say, I need to figure out what's going on. She was with her family and they're playing some board games. And as families do, they after they've been together for an hour or two, they start reminiscing, right? That's the beauty of family, is that you can reminisce the times that you've once spent together. That's why you don't want to lose those hippocampal index neurons, because if you do, you've lost at least a big chunk of things that you could otherwise reminisce with loved ones, with friends that you've been together with for many years, right? So that's why it's so critical to hold on to these. It's so critical to build strong stabilization, anchoring to those synapses and neurons. So no matter what happens, no matter what challenges that synapse or that neuron, you're still going to hold on to it. And there's ways to do that. That's what we're doing this weekend. How do we go about doing it? So she was with her family, her adult children, and they were talking. They were reminiscing about what had happened many, many years ago. And they were all laughing, and they're like, oh, you remember when we went camping, and so-and-so did this, and they were like laughing, and my patient, who's a very successful executive, doing international contracts, traveling a lot, very good at what she does. She's going like, what? I have no memory of that. And they were going like, what? Like, Mom, you don't remember when you said this and we did this? And she had no memory. It had been wiped out. She had essentially lost that library card that connected her. Or you could say she had lost her cryptocurrency password. That cryptocurrency was gone forever. So, hopefully your cryptocurrency never gets Alzheimer's. Okay, which is an interesting thought that we won't go into. So and so she came to me. She says, you know, I need to get every test. I want to figure out what I can do to mitigate my risk, because my family, my kids are now jokingly calling me the Notebook. And some of you maybe have seen the movie The Notebook, which is about a very similar situation, a love story. And so they were just kind of being funny, just kind of saying, but really that's what kind of was going on. And you know what? To her credit, she spent the time necessary to figure everything out. We did broad spectrum labs, which are available in the books I'm going to be talking about if you're interested. We're not going to be talking about all the labs in this setting, but I want to help you understand what your resources are so you can get access to that. Many of the labs you can even order yourself online. Okay, so don't wait until you can find somebody that'll order it for you, even though there's more and more of that going on now. Be willing to do what you need to do now for yourself to accomplish the goal that you have. Don't let anything stand in your way of figuring out what are the factors that are contributing to the strange cognition that I'm experiencing. That was 15 years ago. She's fine. She's still working in her executive position. She has shown no cognitive decline at all. And because she's been now doing all the things that she learned that were peer-reviewed medical literature information, she's doing all of that, so she's actually better now 15 years later than she was then. Think of another patient real quick that came to see me. She was a soccer mom in San Diego, California. And so she would actually take turns driving not only her children to the soccer practices and the soccer games, but also pick up, their friends, right? So they would take turns carpooling. And so she's at a light, and her kids are going like, "Mom, go." And she go like, "I can't go. Look at the light." She says, "The light is green." But her brain was interpreting green as stop. And then a few minutes later, she blows through a red light, and the kids are screaming, "Mom, what are you doing?" She said, "The light was good." She says, "No, the light was red." She was interpreting red as green and green as red. Interesting. And so, and obviously that was, her husband came with her. He was very concerned about what was happening. And do you know that within 4 or 5 months' time, that completely resolved? Because we had found enough of the strategies that she could participate in that would help heal that or minimize the likelihood of that happening. See, if that was just a purely determined, penetrating genetic condition, there's nothing that you could do. It that's just the way it is. But that's rarely the problem when we're dealing with most chronic disease. There's something over time that has contributed to a pathology that all of a sudden hits a tipping point, and now you have more obvious results of that pathology. You have clinical results of that pathology. In this case, the pathology was she was misinterpreting red and green, which is really serious if you're driving a car, right? And so she then figured out by doing broad testing and basically looking at the fundamentals of lifestyle medicine and natural strategies, figuring out what works, and she applied enough of that for her that she no longer had that problem. So that's just a little taste of what I see every day with my patients. It's a little taste of what each of us can accomplish. Again, I'm going to be telling you stories about myself as well. So I'm on everything that I'm going to be sharing with you, I'm doing because I'm trying to optimize. So this is the beginning. The beginning of understanding the two basic principles that really underlie every aspect of health and healing. It all boils down to this. Dr. Sidney Baker, who is a professor of medicine at Yale University Medical School for many years, He was one of my favorite presenters. I never got to meet him in person, but back 30 years ago, I was watching his presentations that he did for medical students and residents. And I loved him. I fell in love with his lecturing style. He had all these witticisms that I'm going to cover a couple of those. But he said this: optimal health and the potential to heal requires that we provide all the necessary elements to optimize the system and remove any interfering elements. Those are the two things that we have to focus on. Whenever something is going wrong with your health, whether that's physical, emotional, social, or spiritual, step back and ask those two main questions. What's missing? What's missing? I reviewed a study just on the flight over here from San Diego this afternoon. That it was a study done with inmates in a prison. And for on average about 140 days, those inmates that were willing to participate basically got a plant-based diet, and they were given certain vitamins, certain key vitamins and minerals, and omega-3 fatty acids. And after 140 days average of that group was responsible for 30%. I believe I'm getting the percentage right. About 30% less hostile acts in the prison. Just a change in diet and addressing the necessary elements and removing interfering elements. So oftentimes, diet is one of the biggest conspirators, if you will, in affecting both sides of this formula, this equation, where it's creating a toxicity in our bodies in a very real sense, in a very real chemical and physiologic sense, but also that very diet is also so deficient in the very nutrients, the vitamins and minerals and essential fatty acids that you and I need, that your brain isn't going to work well. And you're much more likely to respond negatively to everything, especially if you get pushed to your limit, suggesting that what we do and what we eat and many other things in our life in terms of our choice and the exposures that we allow ourselves to be exposed to and the things that we don't even know we're being exposed to, all those things, there's always a tipping point. And what I'm suggesting here from these studies is that tipping point drops and drops and drops. We're more sensitive to lower levels of irritating factors, and we're more sensitive to the lack of key nutrients because of that. Okay, so let's expand on this. So he says nutrients are the necessary elements. Now I want you to think outside of the box. When I say, and when Dr. Sidney Baker from Yale University says nutrients, you want to think about nutrients in the broadest sense of the term. This is not just vitamins and minerals and calories, carbohydrates and fats and proteins. Anything that nourishes. Sunlight, we're going to be talking about sunlight, and I really appreciate the work of Dr. Roger Schwelt at Loma Linda University and Riverside University, where he's on the faculty of medicine in both schools, and he runs a program called MedCram. Anybody ever cram in school? Yeah, I'm the master crammer, right? And it's basically he has all these videos where he's training, he's educating medical students and residents and physicians who want to recertify in their specialty. He's basically providing all the information they need to do so that they can be more successful in taking the test. MedCram, very successful program. What Dr. Roger Schwelt points out is that sunlight can make the difference between somebody dying within a couple days or thriving after a week. We're talking about patients in his critical care unit. He's a critical care physician. He's an internal medicine specialist. He's a pulmonologist. He's a sleep study. He's boarded in 4 areas. And he has been putting out on YouTube some of the best presentations on why we should spend time in the sun every day. You know, this is so important to me now. I understand this so well myself, and I've always believed it, but the more studies I see, the more it solidifies in my mind the importance of spending time outside in the sun. In fact, just this afternoon, after I got dropped off by Dr. McFadden at my hotel, I was standing by the window, and it's so nice. The sun was shining in on the window. I said, but I need to be outside, not just behind a window. And so I looked at the patio below, and there was an area that still had good sunlight. So I went out there. I said, I'm going to take 10 minutes. 10 minutes to I try to get a minimum of half an hour every day outside, preferably an hour outside total. That's the best. You know why? Because it actually recharges the battery of your mitochondria, which are the only organelles in our body that can make energy. If you don't have any mitochondria that are functional, you will die instantly. You will basically suffocate. Okay, so mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and we have 15, 17,000 little generators of energy. They take fat and carbohydrates and convert it to the energy in the body, which is ATP. And if they can't do that, you're dead. That's why there's certain poisons that block that respiratory chain of the mitochondria, and you die unless you get immediate emergency medical care. So the mitochondria get activated by sunlight. The mitochondria produce 20 times more melatonin inside of them when exposed to infrared sunlight, or infrared light if that's all you have is a light box. So anybody that isn't able to spend time outside for whatever reason, I encourage them to get a near infrared and a red light box and use it on a daily basis, because they are now, it's like giving oxygen to somebody who's scuba diving that has lost all their air. Anybody run out of oxygen scuba diving at 90 feet like me? I've done that 3 times. That's a problem, right? But it's always good to have a scuba buddy that has an octopus that can provide you for some oxygen, right? In case you need it. So sunlight is very similar to what the body needs to oxygen. So make sure that that's one of the things that you're adding to your necessary nutrients, and we'll look at that in a little bit. So then Dr. Sidney Baker says toxins are the interfering elements, not just mercury, aluminum, cadmium, arsenic, lead, mold, mycotoxins, not just pesticides and herbicides, on and on and on. Anything that's bad for your body in this respect is a toxin. So I want you to be thinking about what are all the things that nourish our bodies versus all the things that create toxicity and harm and cause damage to our body. And we're focusing tonight and tomorrow afternoon, well, actually all day tomorrow, we're focusing on what happens to the brain and how that relates to diabetes, insulin resistance, and prediabetes, etc. Okay, so the one of Dr. Baker's witticisms is treating the symptoms versus the cause. And he called it the thumbtack rules. This is a really neat little statement that he made. He says, if you're sitting on a tack, it takes a lot of aspirin to make you feel good. You get the point? So we're so focused on symptomatic management that we forget, maybe we should actually address the cause of the problem. And that's one of the main principles of lifestyle medicine, is don't keep looking for something that masks the symptom. The symptom is there, put by God actually, how God developed or made our bodies so that we can use our frontal lobe, do some critical thinking, and figure out by talking to our friends and colleagues and experts what I need to do to fix that problem. So if we have pain because we're sitting on a tack, we should not be focusing on taking more and more aspirin. A corollary to this is if you're sitting on 2 tacks, says Dr. Baker, removing just one of them does not result in a 50% improvement. Now, what if you're actually sitting on 32 tacks? Yeah, I've had so many people say, I tried what you said. It didn't work. They might have removed 10 tacks. Was that important? The fact that it didn't work in changing their pain, does that mean that it didn't help at all? No, every single tack that you remove is a necessary part of bringing healing and restoration of health to the body. It's just not sufficient to end with that one, that second or third, or however many tacks you're sitting on until you get the majority of those tacks. Fortunately, our biologic system and the way that God designed our bodies for health and healing is that if you can get most of those figured out, the body has a way to figuring out the rest of them. God designed our body to be self-healing entities if we are using the right strategies to do so. Okay, so I don't know if you can see this, but about 2 weeks ago, I woke up with a start, and I had this epiphany. I've been actually doing a comprehensive program for patients and their family members called Optimizing Brain Wellness. And after doing a comprehensive weekend like what we're doing today, I kicked off a Monday evening seminar series that was meeting every Monday evening for 12 weeks. Well, I've just finished 9 weeks. So I have about 35 hours of information I'll put together. This is for people to learn how to do this, which is, once again, how do we develop resiliency to those memory neurons so that one misstep does not blow them up. And so as I was thinking about every Friday and Sunday, I was spending the whole day kind of preparing for the Monday evening series. And as I was looking for additional tools, additional strategies to help people understand, develop a checklist. And it hit me one night, it was kind of right when I'm going through rapid eye movement sleep. And it just hit me. Hey, develop a protocol based on hippocampal resiliency index. And so basically, let me read this to you if you can't read this. So column 1 is all the things that promote and build hippocampal neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons, the production of brand new neurons to fill in the gaps where we've lost neurons already in that section of the brain that's responsible for autobiographic memory. It's what makes us who we are. It's what helps us remember the context of where we've come from, where we are now, and where we're headed. So if we lose that autobiographical memory because those index cards have been destroyed, those links to the memories have been deleted, even though the memories are still there, we can't access them. We need to develop new neurons and new synapses and build on and repair the other ones. And so all the things that promote what we call synaptogenesis, the growth and the rebuilding and the restoration of synapses to make them functional so that they're connecting different memory neurons one to another. We can add up to about 1,500 new hippocampal memory cells daily. There's studies now showing that each section of the brain, each hemisphere of the brain has a little hippocampi, and they can grow a new 750 each side. So that's a total of 1,500 new neurons to help us regain that function. The problem is that because of our lifestyle and our choices, unbeknownst to us most of the time, those new neurons don't survive because we're not giving them the environment, the nutrients to survive. We're not protecting them from the toxins that otherwise cause them to be destroyed. So we want to make sure that we're building up that column. The hippocampal resiliency index increases with every nutrient factor that nourishes and promotes hippocampal growth. So now, here's our challenge that we want to start developing, even if it's in our own mind. And you can even go back through these videos that are available on the church YouTube site, how to do this, how to put this together. Develop your own list of hippocampal nutrients. What is going to nourish the growth of new neurons so that you can have resiliency? You're actually improving your memory. You're actually improving your overall cognitive function over time rather than just accepting the fact that, well, as we get older, we just lose it. And that's simply not true. The loss of memory has nothing to do with age other than the fact that the age has allowed for a certain exposure to something that, based on our genetics and otherwise, is creating the problem. Our job is to figure out what is causing the problem and not focus on blaming age, because it's clear it's not because of age. It's because of the ongoing exposure to something that causes damage little bit by little bit. So, start your own checklist and scoring systems. Now, column 2 is about what now? If column 1 is about nourishment, or nutrients, what's column 2 about? Toxins, right. So all the things that promote hippocampal atrophy, the breakdown of cells, the destruction of cells, disrepair of these neurons, these memory neurons, and synaptoclastic breakdown. Synaptoclastic just means that the synapses, the connections between these memory neurons, is basically being broken down. It's like there's an earthquake and the bridge over a river or over another road collapses, and now we don't have that communication, that ability to get across anymore. We're going to have to repair that before we can use that bridge again. Okay, so we'll come back to this concept many times in this series, and I just want you to be thinking of developing your own list. Many people lose up to 1,000 memory index neurons in their hippocampi, that only area of the brain that consolidates short-term memory into long-term memory. It's basically creating that link or that index card, so when it stores it in another area of the brain, it knows where to go when you want to retrieve that. So again, if you lose that index card, that memory that's still there, you can't access it. So the bottom line is that we need to develop our own checklist. Now, I was feeling a little bit proud of myself, I'll be honest with you. Don't feel too proud of yourself too often, because usually it's short-lived, right? And so I was thinking, man, that's a great line, the hippocampal resiliency index, and I was writing them. So I went on my computer and I asked ChatGPT. It says, develop a 2-column. In fact, that's what I was just showing you. Okay, develop a 2-column handout titled Hippocampal Resiliency Index, and it started populating both columns. I go like, I didn't even tell him what to populate it with. I said, what is that? So I realized, I was really happy that somebody else had actually come up with this idea way before me. Actually maybe about a year before me. And so as I looked at that, I said, I'm going to ask AI, who is the first to actually use this term, hippocampal resiliency? And sure enough, it was a doctor in Germany, in fact, a young doctor who had just graduated, who had won a a major national award for this very concept, the concept of resilience to Alzheimer's disease. And this is Dr. Luc DeFries. And so, wow, that's interesting. It's a little bit different than what I was just talking about, but just as important and very closely tied to what we just mentioned. See, I was looking for an index where we build each column, we address each column so that by building up the nutrient side, we're now growing new neurons rather than losing neurons. And as we're moving away, getting rid of the irritants, the toxins that destroy these memory neurons, now we're no longer having to subtract 1,000 memory cells every day, right? And so, but what Dr. DeFries pointed out here in this paper that was just published in January of 2025 in the Journal of Molecular Neural Degeneration. But he was actually looking at it from a molecular regeneration, neurocampal or hippocampal neurogenesis. And so his concept is essentially this. Why is it, he was asking, that many individuals that actually have physical evidence of Alzheimer's, because they've done a amyloid PET scan, for instance, that is able to show amyloid building up in between hippocampal neurons in the brain. And these neurofibrillary tangles, these misfolded proteins that shouldn't be there at all. Why is it that some people can have a lot of that and they have no evidence clinically of Alzheimer's? He refers to that as resilience. So something is protecting them outside of that more distinct definition of Alzheimer's. He said Alzheimer's technically is not dementia. Alzheimer's dementia is dementia, but Alzheimer's pathology is just the presence of these amyloid plaques in the brain that can be noted by a amyloid PET scan, something that costs in the neighborhood of $7,000, or a phosphorylated tau 217 protein blood test, which is under $400. And they actually correlate very highly. And that's what I'm doing with most of my patients now, is I'm recommending, if they can't immediately get a scan, go ahead and do the blood test so we can have a starting point to work from. So why is it that some people can have a high level of that, but they're still doing okay? And that's because there's many other factors, there's many other nutrients that you can build up, and many other toxins irritants you can remove from the equation that are as important, if not much more important, than the presence of those tangles. All right? So even people who there was a study that I was just mentioning to a group of colleagues this afternoon. There's a study that just came out last week, or at least reported on last week, in the online journal Medscape, that said that if somebody gets a test for these amyloid tangles in their brain, whether it's a scan or a blood test, they lose interest in doing anything about it, no matter what the test shows. Like, what? That's crazy. Why would they lose interest? Okay, so if they tested negative, in other words, there didn't seem to be a problem, now they're no longer motivated to have that better lifestyle. They're no longer, apparently, based on that one study. And on the other hand, if they tested positive, the doctor says, yeah, you got evidence of Alzheimer's here, the tangles. That's what Alzheimer's is. It's just the tangles. Alzheimer's disease is the clinical aspect of the decline of cognition. So, they're essentially wondering, well, why does this happen? So the good news is that there is the potential to build resiliency, and we have the potential to dramatically improve our cognitive health. Let's go ahead and move forward because there's a lot to cover here. Okay, so real quickly, there was a major study that was published in January of 2025 in the medical journal Nature Medicine, entitled The Lifetime Risk of and Projected Burden of Dementia. The reason I'm pointing this out is that Alzheimer's and other aspects of cognitive decline are exponentially rising in all age groups. That's the bottom line. I mean, exponentially, not just up a little bit. I mean, it's kind of like the way gold and silver is going right now. It's exponential. We don't know how long that's going to take place, but what we do know is that the way cognitive diseases are being diagnosed today, there is no expectation that that's going to change dramatically in the near future. It's just going to keep getting worse unless a large amount of us pay attention to the principles that we're focusing on this weekend. So let me just cut to the chase in terms of going over the information here. And so one of the studies that those of us that are in the field of preventive medicine or lifestyle medicine and do a lot of research looking at the epidemiology, the health of populations, one of the most well-known studies ever and still ongoing is called the Framingham Health Study. And this study actually began in 1948, where they measured every single household, everybody in every household. They measured all their blood tests and questionnaires, and they've been tracking those individuals and their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren since 1948, everybody in that town. And so there's a tremendous amount of research that's coming from that gives us eye-opening understanding of what to do and what not to do. The Framingham study, they carved out about 10,000 individuals from that study, and they specifically were looking at the incidence of new levels of dementia in that population, starting with people that were 45 years of age back in 1975 up to 105 years of age. And they tracked that group of people until 2009. What they discovered was that 14% of those individuals, of those men, developed dementia. And about 23% of the women developed dementia. Now, let me just say that to the best of my awareness, the issue is not that women are at higher risk of dementia. Women are healthier than men, by and large. They live longer than men. Therefore, they live long enough and more likely to get diagnosed in late life with dementia, whereas many of the men that would have developed dementia at that time have died previously. Okay, so I'm going to leave that one alone. So women don't think there's something wrong with the way God created you. No, it's a question, you're just living longer. You're probably living a little bit healthier than most men, but we want to figure out more fully what we can do to prevent that from happening at all. And that's the goal. So, all right, so fast forward just a few years. Now look at this atherosclerosis risk and community study called the ERIC study. They looked at 15,000 plus individuals from age 55 to 95. Now look at the years carefully. This study began in 1987, just 12 years after the Framingham study started. And it concluded in 2020, just 11 years after the Framingham study concluded. And now, so we're only talking about just over a decade difference between these two studies. Look at the increase in the prevalence of dementia between these two studies. It went from 14% in men to 35%, more than doubling in just over 10 years. This is critical. This was a very similar population now. In fact, the University of Minnesota participated in the study. So a lot of people from Minnesota were part of the study. And so then in terms of women, the risk went from 23% of them to 48%. And that all happened before 2020. and this has taken off huge since then. Okay, huge since then. I have one of my patients is a manager of a large neurology medical group in San Diego and has been for decades. And she says, we have never seen this level of dementia in 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and 50-year-olds. So much so that the typical age group of people that are coming in their late 60s, 70s, and 80s with dementia are having a hard time getting appointments. And she was basically trying to figure out, why is this happening? And so we need to figure out, why is this happening? What can we do to mitigate that risk? So real quickly here, here's an interesting study that was put out by Blue Cross Blue Shield on working age individuals between 18 and 64. And Blue Cross Blue Shield, they represent about 1/3 of all the insurance for working age Americans. And so what they found here is that 37,000 or more commercially insured Americans between ages of 30 and 64 were diagnosed with early onset dementia. And that basically means before age 65. So a huge increase. And so take a look at this. There was, if you're between ages of 55 and 64, 143% increase in dementia in just between the years of 2013 and 2017. That's not even accounting what's going on right now, which is much worse. Then if you were between the ages of 45 and 54, a 311% increase in dementia just in those few years. And then finally, if you're 30 to 44 years of age, basically a quadrupling of risk, of likelihood of developing this early onset dementia. So, real quickly, we have about 7.2 million individuals in the United States alone with Alzheimer's. And another 200, that's over the age of 64. And there's another 200,000 and counting individuals under the age of 65 who have the early onset dementia. Now, typically when we use the term dementia, that's the umbrella term that covers many different forms of dementia. But roughly 75-80% of all cases of dementia fall into Alzheimer's category. And to that I say, you want it to be Alzheimer's. You don't want it to be Lewy body disease. You don't want it to be frontal temporal dementia like Bruce Willis has, right? You don't, or Robin Williams. You don't want it to be some of these much more serious forms of dementia. Vascular dementia, of course, we know what to do about that, is make sure that we're optimizing circulation. Vascular dementia is the second most common form of dementia, even though it's much less than Alzheimer's. Now, Alzheimer's almost always includes a vascular component, so that's why we have to also address any circulatory risk factors as we go along the way. Okay, now, in 2012, out of the 318 million people currently living then, it was estimated that a full 45 million of them, of those of us that were alive, should have been most of us here, except some of you kids in the front row here, that 45 million of us would go on to develop dementia. But that was in 2012. Now we have an estimated 342 million American residents, and the best estimates right now, and I think this way is an underestimate, that there's a doubling of the risk. So now we're looking at over 90 million of us currently alive will survive long enough to develop dementia. We know that the leading causes of death in the United States, heart disease, cancer, and many new studies are saying Alzheimer's, number 6. Other studies are actually putting it at number 3. Now, one of the tests that's used to evaluate the pathology of Alzheimer's, we talked about the amyloid PET scan, but there's also, we already talked about the MRI that Dr. Ronald Peterson from Mayo Clinic used to diagnose Glenn Campbell. But there's also a PET scan that is called the fluorodeoxyglucose PET scan. Just a fancy name for just basically injecting a labeled glucose into your veins and seeing how much of that gets absorbed by different sections of the brain. You see, the brain uses 25% of all the energy in the body. The brain is like a super AI computer that's just sucking up energy, right? We're getting to the point in the U.S. economy where a large amount of the energy, of electricity, of natural gas used to make electricity is going to be going to those large AI centers in the outskirts of most cities that are just sucking up. They take a lot of energy. Supercomputers take a lot of energy, and our brain is the master supercomputer. It takes a lot of energy. That's why a lot of people are experiencing fatigue, because the brain is losing its energy. It's losing its mitochondrial resiliency. We're literally blowing up these memory neurons because of all the stresses and the lack of nutrients and the excess toxins we're exposed to. So when you do this test, the fluorodeoxyglucose PET scan is actually able to measure how much blood sugar or glucose, sugar, is able to be drawn from the blood into that section of the brain. And if that section of the brain is not getting much sugar, that means the brain has developed insulin resistance, which is the same thing that drives diabetes and prediabetes. It's the same thing that drives most of heart disease or cardiovascular disease. It's insulin resistance. The number one cause of infertility in the United States is insulin resistance. A major cause of cancer, believe it or not, is insulin resistance. When the body has to make more insulin to try to control blood sugars, which it always does if it can, then that extra insulin is a growth promoter. And if you're at risk of cancer or have cancer growing, it's going to like putting gasoline on a fire. We've known this for 50 years. I remember in 1990, I was practicing with the Loma Linda Faculty Medical Group in Sun City, California. And one of the clinical faculty at Loma Linda University, who's a gerontologist, this was my first year in clinical practice. So she took an interest in me, and she said, "Hey, Wes, were you aware?" Because I was doing all these glucose tolerance tests, diagnosing people with diabetes way before they were diagnosed by standard testing. And that included measuring insulin levels. We'll get into that in a little bit. And she said, "Hey, Wes, are you aware that excess insulin production in the body is one of the major causes of breast cancer?" And I looked at her, and I thought she was pulling my leg. I was like, "What? That's crazy. What does insulin have to do with cancer? Insulin has to do with diabetes and insulin resistance and pre-diabetic syndrome and metabolic syndrome. But what would that have to do with cancer?" And she says, "Look it up." See, because it's not good enough to just have a colleague tell you something. Because, they might be wrong. And so the right answer is always look it up for yourself. Use that frontal lobe that God gave you to do some critical thinking. And I went home and I got on PubMed. This is 1990. Okay, I had a 64K computer. Okay, my cell phone is about 1,000 or 10,000 times more powerful than that 64K computer now. And I started looking up study after study after study. And I just couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. I go like, whoa, this is insane. All this time I've studied, all these years I've studied, I've never seen this, and now it's everywhere. Isn't that true for a lot of things? right? And I literally came up with 700 studies that showed that high insulin production, which means the body's become resistant. The muscles of the body and other organ systems have become resistant to the activity of insulin. And so now the pancreas, in order to try to control the blood sugars, is making a lot more insulin to force the body to store that sugar. So it's like the cells are going like, we don't want, no mas, right? We don't want any more sugar. We got all the sugar we want. We're overloaded. Stop giving us sugar. So they're shutting down the gateways for sugar to come in. They're literally removing the receptors for insulin so that insulin can't even work as well. But then the pancreas goes like, our job is to lower the blood sugar, so we're just going to make as much insulin as it takes to lower the blood sugar. So now the pancreas is making 2 times, 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, 30 times more insulin than it should have to. And now our body's swimming with insulin and our blood sugars are sort of getting better, but now we have high blood sugars and high insulin levels. And you know what that insulin does? It promotes Alzheimer's. That's my number one concern. My number 2 concern, promotes cancer. As I already said, studies have been showing that, well, way before 1990, because I looked up 700 studies in 1990 that showed just for breast cancer, but you know it's one of the biggest causes of prostate cancer. It's one of the biggest causes of colon cancer. It's actually a big cause of skin cancer. I can't make this up. Look it up, right? And so that was really crazy. So this fluorodeoxyglucose test is a super fancy, super expensive way to evaluate. That's another $6,000-$7,000 test that you hope your insurance company will pay for, right? Okay, but that test is telling us definitively that that part of the brain is hypometabolizing. It's not able to draw in as much sugar or carbohydrates from the blood, right? And then that means that the brain is starting to become hypoglycemic. And if you've ever been hypoglycemic like I have, I've been so hypoglycemic that I could walk, but I couldn't talk. And I think that's probably worse than most of you in the room. Okay, I've been there. And that was when I was in college, running track. That's how horribly hypoglycemic I would get. And so about a third of my patients are actually hypoglycemic. And that's one of the worst things for your brain. Because when your blood sugars drop and your brain stops getting glucose, either because the sugar's low or because the sugar might be high, it's just not getting into the brain because the brain has diabetes. The brain has insulin resistance, right? And so that's why Alzheimer's, many pathologists refer, Dr. Susan de Lamont from Brown University, a neuropathologist, calls Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes of the brain or insulin resistance of the brain. She's been talking about that for 35 years, and very few people have been paying attention to her. But she's right. She had a lot of information on this. So the bottom line is that if your insulin levels go high, that's really bad for the brain. The high blood sugars cause that caramelization, right? Have anybody ever caramelized something where you take sugar or honey and caramelize a protein? Have you ever tried to uncaramelize something? You can't do it, right? Because now you've created a new chemical, a new molecule. You've basically caramelized. You've glazed something. Have you ever tried to unglaze a donut? Right? And so that's why that's why the hemoglobin A1C, the blood test, that those of you that went through the Diabetes Undone program and just finished it here at the church, and by the way, if there's a group of 20 or more people that want to sign up for or are interested in doing the Diabetes Undone program, which is the best way to reverse insulin resistance and the single most effective way to reverse risk for Alzheimer's and improve cognitive function, is to do something like the Diabetes Undone program. Why? Because it's a comprehensive lifestyle medicine approach. It's not just talking about blood sugars. It's talking about everything that improves health. So if some of you did not go through the Diabetes Undone program recently here, want to take advantage of that, maybe early in the year, in the next year, in January, February, there'll be a sign-up sheet. I don't know who's got the sign-up sheet, but there'll be a sign-up sheet that's going around both tonight and tomorrow for your interest. So high insulin levels, one of the reasons insulin is bad for your brain is because the very enzyme that's mostly responsible for breaking down amyloid in the brain, right, which is the main hallmark of Alzheimer's, is an enzyme that's actually called insulin-degrading enzyme. And it's called that because that's something that it does. So it degrades the protein insulin, but it also degrades amyloid proteins, which are causing damage to the brain. So if you have insulin resistance, and we're going to show you how that works tonight and tomorrow, if you have any of the indicators of insulin resistance, okay, that means that your body is producing more insulin, and that insulin is being degraded all the time by the insulin degrading enzyme that no longer has much time to degrade amyloid plaque. And so if you're insulin resistant all day long, and many of my patients are, they're insulin resistant after meals, and they're still resistant to insulin even after an overnight fast. Their insulin levels are high. I'm going to show you how to calculate that yourself. And so the elevated, the insulin causes these enzymes to focus almost all their time on breaking down insulin and very little time cleaning and detoxifying the brain. Therefore, you see how important that is in those two columns of optimizing hippocampal resiliency index, or score would be another way to say. Are you on a positive score where you're building and maintaining 1,500 new index hippocampal neurons for your memory every day? Okay, and then you're removing the toxins that otherwise would destroy 1,000 memory neurons a day. So now you're up 2,000. And every day you're gaining maybe 2,000 neurons, right? As opposed to losing 2,000. Or losing because you're always making new ones. You're just not holding on to them. They're getting destroyed because of the lack of nutrients and too much excessive toxicity. Okay, and then so high sugars cause that glycosylation, just like a hemoglobin A1C test is showing lots of sugar attaching irreversibly to the proteins in your body. Okay, by the way, fructose, high fructose corn syrup, we're going to be touching on that tomorrow afternoon. It will cause this caramelization, this glycosylation, 10 times faster than glucose. So glucose is bad enough. It's definitely toxic to the brain. Okay, but fructose is even 10 times more toxic. So that's why one of the things on your checklist to avoid would be sodas, pancake syrup, anything that is high fructose, whether it's corn syrup or whether it's agave. I used to think, well, agave, the way it was marketed, wow, like this is the best thing since ever, right? Agave is so healthy for us because it's not high fructose corn syrup, but it's high fructose from another plant. Same thing in terms of how the body responds to it. So it was marketed very effectively as the wellness sweetener, but it was all propaganda. All propaganda. So whenever I go to I don't know, do you have nectar out here? So in California, Southern California, we have a company that makes smoothies and bowls of whole fruit. really good with acai berries and strawberries and blueberries, etc. So once in a while, I'll get one of those bowls, and I say, please do not put agave syrup on it, because almost everybody does that. It's like sprinkling a little bit of arsenic on your salad. No, it's not that bad, but it's still toxic. All right. So you got high blood sugars are bad for your brain. High insulin levels are really bad for your brain, and what's even worse for your brain is when that insulin gets high after that meal, it's going to force that blood sugar back down in many of us. And the lower that blood sugar goes, the worse it is for your brain. The brain literally starts shutting down multiple compartments. I have my patients do what's called the glucose tolerance test. And where they're actually in the lab most of the morning, getting their blood sugar drawn before a drink, and then the lab gives you this like sweet Sprite to drink, 75 grams of pure glucose, which is similar to eating a cup and a half of white rice, by the way. So a lot of patients tell me, I would never drink something that sweet, so my blood sugar, that's not relevant. I go like, sorry, that would have happened exactly the same way if you'd eaten a cup and a half or 2 cups of white rice or excess carbohydrate. Okay? I mean, but the bottom line is any extra carbohydrate, especially if it's refined, is going to shoot blood sugars up or your insulin up. Okay, but then if you get that low blood sugar, that destroys more brain neurons than anything. That's really bad. It's super stressful to the brain. And so be aware of that we need to stabilize blood sugars, prevent the highs, and especially prevent the lows. This is really, really critical. So, all right, let's keep going here. So this was the article that I read from Dr. Bredesen in 2014, The Reversal of Cognitive Decline, a novel therapeutic program. And that's where he taught me that a big part, not the entirety, but a big part or a big driver, most common driver of Alzheimer's is what I just got done talking about, this insulin resistance. And we know we can fix that. That's the beauty of it. There's no enigma here. Everybody can improve insulin resistance. Everybody. And you can even improve the ability to grow new beta cells in your pancreas that make insulin. Just like we know you can grow new memory cells in your brain. Okay? So you can have new growth. All right, now, so this is a slide directly from Dr. Bredesen where he's making the argument you can't just fix one thing in Alzheimer's. This notion, this misplaced notion that eventually we're going to find that one medication that fixes Alzheimer's. It's never going to happen. Why? Because Alzheimer's isn't caused by one dysfunctional mechanism. It's caused by 36 or more dysfunctional mechanisms. In other words, we have to start looking at the entire picture. We have to do the testing. We have to figure out where they are coming from. So there's patients that say, oh, this is too overwhelming for me. I just want it to be 1 or 2 things that I can do. Just tell me 1 or 2 things that I can do. It's like you're sitting on 36 tacks and you just want me to remove 3 tacks. It's not going to work. Okay, that's not how Alzheimer's works. It's not up to me. If it was up to me, I wish it was only 3 things, but it's not. Okay, so let's read through this a couple slides real quick. This kind of gives the nutshell of the process of increasing hippocampal index neurons in our brain, reversing our predisposition to Alzheimer's, and even reversing aspects of Alzheimer's. So in Alzheimer's treatment, there's no single drug that gives anything beyond a marginal, unsustained, symptomatic effect with little or no effect on disease progression. In order to get effective improvements in Alzheimer's or any form of cognitive decline, we must address the underlying causes, plural, of the disease and focus on combination strategies. You don't just try this and say, but I tried this for 10 weeks, it didn't work. Okay, and I stopped doing that because it didn't work, right? And then I go over here, let's say that was exercise. Okay, now I'm going to focus on diet. I'm going to do that for 10 weeks. Well, that didn't work. Okay, it might have helped a little bit, but you need to do multiple strategies upon strategies when we're dealing with such a complex condition like this. So, focusing on combination strategies, a comprehensive, network-based, synergistic approach. It will be necessary to target multiple pathways at the same time, simultaneously, in order to affect an improvement in symptoms and pathophysiology. The goal is not simply to normalize metabolic parameters. Like, for instance, let's look at those of you that have been to the Diabetes Undone program. You all know about the hemoglobin A1C. And those that you don't know, that's just a badly named blood test, okay, that is looking at how much sugar or glucose is irreversibly binding to the proteins in your red blood cells called hemoglobin. So it's called hemoglobin A1C, or basically sugar coating test or caramelization of proteins in your body. That happens everywhere in your body, not just in your red blood cells. It happens everywhere. It happens to your cholesterol. It happens to your white blood cells. It happens everywhere. And when you get that irreversible binding of glucose, that's irreversible because now it's that way for the rest of that cell's life cycle. So the only way you can reverse the irreversible is because God made your bodies to recycle. God made our bodies to basically restore back to normal. We create new cells, and if we're no longer exposed to high sugar levels, they will not get glycosylated and drive your hemoglobin A1C high. That's why somebody on a program like Diabetes Undone can lower their hemoglobin A1C dramatically in just 3 to 4 weeks. Even though it's an average of 120 days, it can lower dramatically because now you're learning to control your blood sugars right after the meal. You learn how to use exercise immediately after the meal. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. You're learning how to balance your diet so the sugars don't go up as much. And if the sugars don't go up as much because of diet and exercise and proper sleep and stress management, etc., and sunlight exposure, sunlight can lower your blood sugars like 20%. Just being out in the sun. Okay? So get on the sun when you exercise. That basically lowers that curve. So now you have less hemoglobin A1C. You have less glycosylation, less caramelization. So we don't simply normalize, because normalize on the blood test, if you look at the blood test, it says normal is what? Somewhere around 4 point something, which is not important, okay, up to 6.4, right? Because 5.6 now. It used to be 6.4, but now it's 5.6. Why? Because that is just underneath the diagnosis for pre-diabetes. And so the lab says that anything that's less than 5.7 is normal. Is that good enough? Absolutely not. Unless you're on high-dose medications, you don't want to drive your hemoglobin A1C down just using medications. That would be dangerous. But if you're using diet and lifestyle, you want to get it down ultimately to about 5.0 or 5.1. So that's an example of what this is saying here. It's saying the goal is not simply to normalize the metabolic parameters to get the A1C under 5.7, okay, because that's still way too high. That's still promoting disease. It's still promoting heart disease. That's still promoting Alzheimer's. That's still promoting cancer. It's not acceptable. It's not good enough, right? But rather we optimize them. We get them to a level that would be consistent with somebody that's actually really healthy. Imagine that, right? We're comparing ourselves with somebody that's actually healthy as opposed to, somewhere around 95th percentile of the population, which is not almost ever healthy. Okay, so just as in other chronic diseases, the goal is to reach a threshold effect such that once enough of the underlying causal network components have been impacted, the pathological process would be halted or even reversed. See, so we're taking the time to give you this introduction because, for instance, I was speaking at the American College of Lifestyle Medicine meetings years ago, and one of my fellow professors at Loma Linda University, who's a neurologist, cornered me. He was also giving a presentation. He says, "Wes, you're not telling people you can reverse Alzheimer's, are you?" And so I looked at him. I said, "Well, you're the neurologist. Define Alzheimer's." And he kind of took a step back. And then I said to him, I'm helping people understand that you can improve upon pathology. How far we can take that is dependent on that person. It's depending on what that person is capable of doing. But that's why I always refer to it as reversing aspects of Alzheimer's. I've had people dramatically improve their health. I'm going to tell you a couple stories tomorrow afternoon about somebody who had Alzheimer's for 15 years. The last 5 years were advanced Alzheimer's. They're basically in a vegetative state. They could hardly communicate at all with her husband. She didn't even know who her family was. She didn't know who her sister was or anything for years. But you know, after a year and a half of her husband doing the program with her, because she couldn't do it herself. She had absolutely no ability to do anything herself. In fact, I never even worked directly with her. I worked through the husband entirely. Within a year and a half, she was able to go visit her sister, and she was able to tell her husband, "You turned the wrong way. You know, you need to go this way." So she had her spatial recognition back. She had her memory back about her childhood. She had those index neurons working functionally again. She as they drove into her sister's driveway, she jumped out of the car, ran to her sister, called her by name and hugged her, and spent the afternoon reminiscing, which she had not been able to do for 5 to 10 years before. She still had Alzheimer's. She never got out of that major category. But she improved her health and her mental health and cognitive function so much, she went from completely non-functional to very functional. And her husband says, "I have my wife back. She can joke with me. She can run into the kitchen, you know, while I'm working on the computer and give me that face that she used to do when we were high school sweethearts. I have my wife back." That's far more important than whether you reversed Alzheimer's or not. She's functional again. Not like she was when she was 25, but she's functional enough to be a wife. She's functional enough to be a sister. She's functional enough to enjoy family again. And that is everything. Never want to lose that. And that's the problem with Alzheimer's. If we act like, well, this is just what happens when I get older, if we act like this is just going to go on and I'm just going to go with it, that's really bad news, because it will eventually get to the point where you're completely lost who you are. And I, for one, do not want to do that, because I know I'm at risk of that. And that's why I'm being so passionate about addressing that with you today. Okay, so this is exciting, isn't it? So the approach is personalized based on over 150 different data points, including labs, scans, cognitive tests, and history. The protocol has continued optimization over time. Each network risk factor is addressed in the most rational, physiologic way and as far upstream as possible. This is very rational medicine. It's very rational. It's using the best peer-reviewed literature that fits the context of what we're trying to accomplish. So here's a picture of Dr. Bredesen. He's the tall guy on the right. And an amazing researcher, Alzheimer's specialist, neurologist of 45 years now. That's his website, drbredesen.com. In 2017, I was actually on the committee that chose speakers for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine's international meetings, which is always fun because you get to pick the speakers you want to hear yourself, right? And so Dr. Bredesen agreed. I called him up and said, hey, Dale, would you be willing to come and speak at our big conference? You know, thousands of people showing up every year to our conferences, and it's the fastest growing medical specialty out there right now, because of course it only started 21 years ago. That's why it's the fastest growing, but it's a lot of specialists from all walks of medicine and health are joining to incorporate lifestyle medicine in their own specialties. And so Dr. Bredesen was going to give the keynote presentation, and then about 2 weeks before the conference, Dr. Bredesen called me up and said, hey, Wes, I'm going to be in Europe. I double booked. And he says, I'm sorry. And he's one of the most gracious people I've ever met, actually. And I said, no worries, we'll figure it out. So I talked to my committee, and we decided I was going to do the talk, because I was fully enmeshed in this, right? As you can tell, I'm really into this, right? So I gave the keynote presentation, and then because of that, the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine wanted me to do a write-up kind of summarizing what I had discussed. And so that's where this paper, Clinical Lifestyle Medicine Strategies for Preventing and Reversing Memory Loss in Alzheimer's, right? So that was published in 2018. And then it was also later on in 2018 when Dr. Bredesen said, hey, Wes, could you participate in a study where we're collecting 100 patients that have reversed cognitive decline, and we want to publish this in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease and Parkinsonism. And so I was able to put together 14 of my patients and added them to this paper, where we're documenting, again, in peer-reviewed medical literature, that many times this is a reversible process, especially if you catch it earlier. Now, there's four, this is real important. Essentially, the majority of us in the room are in one of these categories. This is really important for us to understand. The majority of us in this room are in one of these four categories. The continuum of cognitive decline, the four major stages. So we've been talking a lot about dementia, or in this case Alzheimer's, which is the lion's share of dementia. And that's clearly when we've developed so much dysfunction in daily living that it's obvious that we have, well, it might not be obvious to some, okay, but there's enough evidence that there is a loss of certain short-term memory or other things that create risk for us. You know, for instance, if somebody have you ever left the stove on? I have. Okay, all right. Yeah, thank you, Pastor. Yeah, that's kind of dangerous, right? You don't want to do that very often. Have you ever plugged in an iron and ironed and then got a phone call and left the iron? Hopefully you didn't burn through your shirt. I ironed my shirt for tomorrow, but I made sure I unplugged the iron after I did that. So there's certain, if we have an issue holding on to memories long enough to prevent serious risk, then obviously that is a concern. So now let's just start at the top here, pre-symptomatic. Pre-symptomatic means that there's no indication, not even a mild thought that, man, I'm not as sharp as I used to be, which is called subjective cognitive impairment. With subjective cognitive impairment, you test really well. There's no evidence by any type of neuropsychiatric or psychological testing that there's a problem. Your friends and your family members, they don't really notice anything usually, but man, you know you're not as sharp as you used to be, right? And I've worked with many patients in that subjective cognitive impairment. We'll tell you some stories about that tomorrow afternoon. But before that comes evidence through testing that there is a pathology developing. There's a problem brewing in the body that has not yet risen to the level of altering your abilities cognitively, but it's just starting to show. That can show on an amyloid PET scan, that can show on another type of scan potentially, that can show up with a blood test, either a tau 217 test or a neurofilament light test that's looking at neural degeneration in the brain specifically, or a glial fibrillary acidic protein, or GFAP test, which is looking at inflammation in the brain. So those are indications that there is a pre-symptomatic evidence of problem, and many, many people are taking advantage of tests to see if they're at risk. They're taking advantage of genetic testing to see if there's some early indicators of a problem that they can start preempting now. One of the reasons this is important to me is because when I was 10 years old, my mother died of glioblastoma. It rocked my world. My parents were Christian missionaries in South America. I was born in Chile. I lived in Argentina for many years, where my dad taught at a university in theology. And then we moved to Uruguay and then to Bolivia. While in Bolivia, my mother started having headaches. We thought it was a dental problem. Went on furlough, took care of her dental problems, came back to Bolivia within 3 weeks. Radiologist at a new Catholic hospital in town said, "You got to get her on the next plane out of here. We can't do anything." She already had a glioblastoma the size of a golf ball in her brain. So that really rocked my world. It made me realize that I want to know what I'm at risk of. That's what it made me aware, even as a 10-year-old. I remember as a 13-year-old, I was asking my dad, "Why did Mom have to die of cancer? She was such a vibrant, healthy, amazing woman. I was a total mama's boy. I loved her so much, and she just got taken out of my life at age 10. And I remember asking my dad when I was 13, "Why did this have to happen?" And he didn't know what to say. And I remember saying to him, like it was just last week, we were in Barron Springs, Michigan, raking leaves one autumn afternoon. There's a lot of leaves where we live. And after about an hour and a half talking about the Cubs and different things that dads and sons talk about, I finally started talking about Mom, that we'd lost now for 3 years already. And I said, "Dad, I wish I knew what I'm at risk of so I can start working on it now." I was 13. Without realizing that, I started reading every book on health that I could find. And so much so, some of my friends thought I was just scamming the system because I'd do book reports on skin and nail care. It was just one more book on health that I was interested in. I said, "No, I actually read that book." And I go like, "Yeah, right." And so the more I read about health, the more I realized that I wanted to be somebody to not only protect myself, but could help other people dramatically improve their health. Not just prevent problems, but help reverse problems once they've started. Primary, secondary, and tertiary styles of prevention. So we have pre-symptomatic, we have subjective, then we have mild cognitive impairment that we already said nothing really mild about it. It is actually you're already not testing as well. You're already scoring lower on that scale of 30 points on that neuropsychological test. There's clearly a dysfunction. You're not remembering as well, and so you're scoring under 26 out of 30. Somewhere between 21 and 26. And then you have dementia. So if you're at 19, 20, 21, and you have dysfunctions of daily living, or you're struggling with some of the things that you should be able to do in your daily life, then that's still classified as dementia. And then if you're under 19, then that's generally considered dementia, if consistent with the clinical picture. So the good news is that we can improve this all the way through. So again, this book that I mentioned, I'm really not a writer, okay, but this book was like inspired. Because when I was called by Dr. Arvo Khanna, a neurologist in Tennessee, who had actually been at Loma Linda when we were there, Dr. McFadden, and he had actually introduced me to this couple 5 years before at a Diabetes Undone celebratory dinner, because this lady had diabetes and she'd already had Alzheimer's for 10 years. And at the time, Dr. Arvo Khanna said to me, says, "Is there anything we can do for her dementia?" And I said, at this point, boy, I don't know. At that point, I didn't realize it. This was almost 15 years ago, or over 10 years ago. And so I'd already met them, but then now 10 years goes by. She's had Alzheimer's now for 15 years. And he's telling the husband, you got to put her into hospice. You're ruining your health. You're not going to survive this. He was the sole caregiver. There's nobody else to help, at least he thought. And so he says, no, I'm not going to do it. Is there anything I can do? Well, Dr. Arvo Khanna had been at my lecture the year before. It was in Indiana, somewhere at a big conference center in Indiana. And, I remember he talked to me at the time. He says, I'm a neurologist, and I don't know. He was just being honest with me. He says, I don't see this. I don't see this happening. I've never seen somebody improve with this type of condition. So this lady that he was treating, he said, maybe you can call Dr. Youngberg, because he had been at my lecture. So he called me. He was holding on to that one little slim hope. And I remember thinking, man, come on, Dr. Arvo Khanna, you're setting me up here. How can I give somebody hope when it might be false hope, right? I remember thinking that. But then I also reminded myself that there should always be hope. We should always try. And so we started meeting once a month by phone. He didn't even have internet. She'd had Alzheimer's for 15 years, 5 of those years advanced. For 3 years at that point, she had had sundowning syndrome every evening for 3 years. 3 to 4 hours every evening, she's packing her suitcases, trying to get out the front door to go live with mom, who's been dead for 30 years. She's having hallucinations. She's all anxious. That's what we call sundowning syndrome. And so her husband's explaining this to me. It's like, I'm thinking, how do you do this? How can you live that way? Spending 4 hours every evening trying to keep your wife from walking outside with her suitcase. Do you know that because of what he did, not because of what she did, because she didn't want to do it, because of what he did and finding ways to show his love her, that he cared for her and he wanted her to do these things and found the way he got her to exercise. You know how he did that? This is really great. So find a way. Don't find excuses. She won't do it. He won't do it. I can't do it. Find a way. He figured out a way to get her to exercise. She did not want to exercise. She didn't want to go walking after meals or any time. She learned all about it during the Diabetes Undone program 5 years before. Didn't want to do it. She was stubborn. Anybody else stubborn in this room? Yeah, like me, right? So we are all naturally stubborn, right? And so he said to me, I figured out a way to get her to exercise. What'd you do? He said, I went up to her and I said, honey, because she had a hard time communicating, right? She said, honey, I'm going to go shopping. You want to go shopping with me? And she would kind of perk up as much as she could, and her eyes would start, getting wide, and she would she would basically say yes. I mean, she could hardly say more than one word at a time, but she could say yes or no. She was really good at saying no, right? Okay, a lot of us grow up, early on, we say no, and then the last things we do is say no all the time. So he would get her in the car because she would willingly go. They'd go to the mall, and they'd go walk around the mall window shopping. And she loved it. So they were doing something together. They were being family again. They were being husband and wife again. They're doing something, a little date every day, going shopping around, going walking. And little by little, she started feeling better. Because when you walk, what happens? You get more circulation to your brain. There are studies that we'll see tomorrow afternoon that show that when you walk every day, you actually grow new hippocampal index neurons dramatically. This has been shown in animal studies. It's been shown in humans. And it's when we're walking, it's the only time that you can actually detoxify the brain of beta amyloid beyond deep sleep during a good night's rest. That's the best way to detoxify the brain, is during deep sleep, when you go to bed early and you sleep deeply in the first half of the night. That deep sleep allows the brain to contract and expand. The brain has pulsation to it. Did you know that? Kind of like a little heart, and if you will. And that pulsation squeezes out toxins through the cerebral spinal fluid that then goes into, ultimately, the bloodstream and to the liver and gets detoxified. The only other way that we're aware that dramatically impacts detoxification of the brain through the glymphatic system, which we'll talk more about tomorrow, is through exercise. So exercise has this ability, through its increased blood flow and how that creates the pulsation of the glymphatic channels that are next to the bloodstream, and it causes the glymphatic, like a lymphatic system, to activate and get rid of toxins. Add that to your hippocampal resiliency index, right? Start filling it in. Very, very powerful strategies. So this younger lady now, in her mid-70s, she's already had Alzheimer's for 15 years, right? Very sad. But she's now starting to improve. She's starting to be able to tell the time. She's starting to do things she hadn't been able to do for more than 5 years. And every month, I'm just meeting with him once a month. Sometimes he has to go, because he didn't have good cell service either. You have to go into town and use a payphone. Interesting. He was committed to his high school sweetheart. His love, the love of his life. It's an amazing love story, how committed he really was to her. And every month, they went through their ups and downs. She fell out of the bed, broke her hip one time, got institutionalized. That almost ruined the whole thing. But then they got right back into it, figured out what to do. Figured out, don't give up. And they never gave up, and she kept getting better and better and better and better. To the point where after a year and a half, I already told you, she was able to spend that wonderful weekend with her sister that she hadn't seen in almost 5 years. She hadn't been able to talk to her on the phone because she didn't know who she was. But now she does. So the reason I'm telling you this story is I realize that none of us are there, or we wouldn't be here, right? None of us are there. But if it can work for her because of commitment, you better believe that it's very possible to work for you and I. That motivates me. And that's what this book was all about, is actually a month-to-month rendition of their story, along with some other stories too. But the core of the book is about their story. 18 months, which is very rare. I usually only spend about 6 to 7 sessions per patient, and they're more on their own. Maybe once or twice a year I meet with them, just to maintain, right? So it takes a while to figure out what to do, how to do it, and then the key then is just maintaining all those new hippocampal neurons and growing new ones every day, getting better and better every day. For them, it took 18 months because of the ups and downs, but it was worth every minute. Every effort that went into that was well worth it. I remember asking him, says, because she had so many abnormal labs and so many things, and that they were spending a lot of effort and time and effort and with the diet and the exercise, and she was actually on quite a few nutritional supplements because she had so many deficiencies. And so I finally, after a while, said, I call them John and Mary in the book, not their real names. I said, John, do you want me to kind of help you prioritize this so you don't have to do as much, take as many of these supplements? And he says, not in your life. I go like, whoa, that's not what I usually hear. I'm usually hearing, can we cut this down some, right? So I'm just trying to figure out what's going to work, right? Every little piece has a potential role to improving health. And he says, when we first started, I pulled out my calculator and figured out what this would cost to put her in memory care. You know what the average memory care cost is right now? Some of you do. It's at least $10,000 a month, typically. I don't know what it is here in this area, but that's a very common price, $10,000 a month. Many people have to basically put up their houses so that they can actually access insurance rates in Medicare, etc. So they lose their houses over it. Says what we're spending right now in time and effort and money to doing this program is not even a fraction. It's a minimal fraction of what it would cost me, and basically not even getting better. It was just palliative care, right? And so I wanted to leave you with a story here as we get ready. This is the first of three major sessions. Tomorrow morning, I encourage you. This is actually one of my favorite talks. If you don't typically go to conventional church service, be brave. Just show up. No, nobody's gonna do anything bad to you, right? Just come. Like I said, be bold enough to even try to sing a little bit. I love singing. I'm a horrible singer, but I don't care because I know it's so good for me. It's so good for me. We can sing when we're feeling patriotic. We can sing when we're at a football game or at a concert. Why can't we enjoy singing and basically get that hippocampal neurogenesis going in our bodies? It's a wonderful way. And if you're not comfortable singing, just hum it out. Just hum. That's almost as good. Humming generates nitric oxide in the brain. It improves circulation. Okay, it's good stuff. So I'm going to be giving a presentation sharing with one of these 10 key principles that I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's a surprise. Okay, but it's one of the most powerful healing agencies that actually integrates a whole bunch of principles. And I can't wait to share that experience and those stories with you tomorrow at 11. Okay, well, we have the general church service, and then I start speaking at 11:30, and then in that we'll have a great lunch, a really healthy lunch, a type of lunch that I wouldn't be surprised might make a difference of maybe 500 new hippocampal index neurons in your brain. Some of us really need that, right? So I know I'm looking forward to it. And then after that lunch at 2 o'clock, we have the longer stretch where we have 2 to 5 scheduled to answer your questions. But I'm going to go through the rest of this presentation, kind of tying in the whole principles of how all this relates to insulin resistance and prediabetes and diabetes and metabolic syndrome, and why reversing or optimizing that to the best possible level we can dramatically restore brain function, can dramatically lessen our risk for cancer, can dramatically lessen our risk for heart disease, and that's just a start. So we're going to be going over all that information. I hope you can come, and I'll be taking a lot of time for questions and answers at that time as well. So if you want to grow another 1,500 neurons tonight, try to get to bed a little early, initiate that deep sleep that dramatically enhances the ability to make new of these index neurons. And then what you learn tomorrow, you'll be able to hold on to those for more than a couple days. Okay? And hopefully for a long, long time. So with that, why don't we end with a word of prayer? Father, we are grateful that we can learn that there is hope. That you have created our bodies in an amazing way where our bodies are self-healing organisms. That if we take advantage of the principles that you've provided to us, we can heal many times. And so, Lord, we want to do our part so that you can bless our efforts. And I just pray a special blessing on everybody here, every family member that is represented here in this meeting tonight, that you will guide them, that you will give them wisdom, that you will give them understanding, and that through the things that we're learning this weekend, they may better able to day by day come closer and closer to what you've intended for us all along, to have optimal health of body, mind, and spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. With that, good night, sleep well.